Iran Chat is brought to you by the American-Iranian Council, pioneering the marketplace of ideas since 1997. Welcome to Iran Chat. I'm Kayvan Afshari, Director of Communications for the American-Iranian Council. On today's episode, we explore Iran's position on the nuclear issue. And we're lucky to have a guest who served as Iran's spokesman in the nuclear negotiations from 2003 to 2005 and is currently a visiting research scholar at Princeton University. I'm pleased to welcome Ambassador Hossein Mousavian. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Ambassador Mousavian, Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which outlines its rights and its obligations as a non-weapons state. However, it appears that these current talks are taking place outside of the framework of the NPT. If that's the case, then why is Iran participating in these talks?
To date, we can say there is no dispute about every measure within NPT. Practically, legally, we have three arrangements within NPT: a safeguard agreement, additional protocol, and subsidiary arrangement code 3.1. Since 2003, which I was member of nuclear negotiation team, we have made it very clear that Iran would be ready to be committed to all three. It means Iran would be ready to be among the most transparent nations on its nuclear activities. When the talk began in 2013, even before, during Larijani, during Jalili, even in our time, back to 2003, the problem has been with the excessive demands of the world powers beyond NPT.
So let's start to get into some of those issues too. One of them in particular is this demand on the US side for Iran to ship some of its stockpiles of low-enriched uranium to Russia for conversion to fuel rods. It's very clear now that the US and its partners are demanding this. Would this stipulation violate Iran's sovereignty, in your opinion?
Within NPT, there is no limits about stockpile. You can have millions of tons of enriched uranium. But Iran itself, from the beginning, has reiterated that we do not need anything beyond our domestic needs. Therefore, I believe for the final deal, Iranians would be flexible to accept a limit on their stockpile proportionate to their domestic needs.
And that would be outside the NPT framework, though, correct? They would do so with the recognition that it's not mandated in the NPT.
Look, the deal would have two phases. Mm-hmm. One phase is for a period of confidence building. Every measure, like stockpile, which we discussed now, beyond NPT would not be forever, would not be permanent. They are discussing whether the period would be 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. They would agree. This is about the duration of the agreement. When they say about duration of agreement, one of the meanings is that the confidence building measures beyond NPT, like cap at the stockpile. After this period, Iran would be treated like every member.
Any other non-weapons member of the NPT.
Yes.
What duration do you think that the negotiators should aspire towards, the Iranian side? A shorter duration, presumably, or?
I think it's better to make it shorter period, not because I'm an Iranian, because more longer would make the whole package more vulnerable.
More vulnerable?
Yeah. Because you don't know what's going to happen after 5 years, after 10 years. You don't know who would be the next American president.
Okay.
You have a lot of elections in Tehran and
So circumstances may change that make that deal no longer, let's say, a win for both sides still.
You see the currently how the U.S. Congress is threatening for sanctions. Who knows? Such a mood would not continue in the future. Therefore, it's better to stick with NPT, make it shorter period to open a dialogue and cooperation on other issues, to begin with communalities.
So let's come back to those core issues in a second. I want to deal first with another demand that the U.S. side, some say, is making, which is outside the NPT. In a previous Iran chat interview with former U.S. nuclear negotiator Robert Einhorn, he said that the United States has taken the position, based on UN Security Council resolutions, that Iran's missiles program should be put on the nuclear negotiating table. Although he himself said it should be put aside, the U.S. has taken this position, he says. Does that demand have any legitimacy?
No, definitely not. The conventional arms, conventional capability, has nothing to do with unconventional arms.
So what about the Security Council resolutions then?
Security Council resolution normally from the beginning has been political statements, not really legal resolutions. From the day one, referring the Iranian nuclear file to UN Security Council was just a political issue. Really had no...
You think it should have stayed in the IAEA?
No legal base. I tell you why. 2004, 2005, 3 countries were found as violators of NPT by IAEA resolutions. South Korea, Egypt, and Iran. They didn't take South Korea and Egypt. The case was exactly the same. Violation of NPT. The resolution made clear that Egypt and North Korea, they have violated. They didn't take the Egyptian case to the UN Security Council because Egypt was ally of the US. They didn't take South Korean case to UN Security Council because South Korea was the US ally. Therefore, from the beginning, all the UN resolutions have been political decisions and really has no legitimate legal basis.
So what you're saying is that the reason that they're taking Iran as a special case compared to Egypt or South Korea is that there's this core mistrust between both sides.
Is
so
more because of the hostilities between Iran and the US.
Right. Which have nothing to do with nuclear necessarily, which have to do with history and, you know.
I really don't believe the US issue is about Iranian nuclear capability. India is not member of NPT, has proliferated and has tested nuclear bomb, and they have hundreds of nuclear bombs. And the US has established a strategic relation with India. You would say India is a big country. It is national interest of the US, of course. But the US can decide based on its national security interest, regardless of the international law, the regulations, and even its own rhetoric. The same is about Pakistan. Even the US is giving billions of dollars of aid to Pakistan, while Pakistan has developed nuclear bomb. You would say these 2 countries, even I would add Israel, these 3 countries from the beginning have not been member of NPT. I would say, let's compare North Korea and Iran. They were both member of NPT. North Korea withdrew from NPT, made nuclear bomb.
Tested.
Iran is still member of NPT, does not have nuclear bomb, and there is no evidence of any diversion on Iranian nuclear program, but the amount and the level of sanctions imposed by world powers on Iran is far, far, far beyond of sanctions imposed on North Korea. Therefore, you can see how political issue is this. It is not really about proliferation. It's more about Iran-US hostility. Is about Iran-Israel issue.
If the core issue is mistrust here and this history, what do both sides need to do now? What's a reasonable step, let's say, that Iran could do? Let's start with Iran in terms of Israel. Let's start there, because right now that's a big issue for the United States. To normalize relations with Iran, they can't do it because they're
See,
Iran threatens Israel.
From the beginning, there has been two big issues blaming Iran on Israel. During the time I was ambassador in Germany, I was working with Europeans and trying to make a good relation between Iran and Europe. Europeans, they were telling me the only major obstacle for peace process is Iran. If Iran cooperates, two-state solution is there. Everyone agrees, and there is no problem. The only obstacle is Iran. Now, after 20 years, they now understand very well that the problem with two-state solution is not Iran, is Israel itself. The other blame on Iran is why Iran does not recognize Israel. I would say we have 57 countries. About 50 of them, they do not recognize Israel. Even the US allies like Saudi Arabia, GCC, they do not recognize Israel, and they have a strategic relation with the US.
So do you think that Iran could move towards that model then, like of the,
No,
or
if you
the
ask
OIC
me,
model?
If you ask me what they should do, first of all, we need to recognize the mistrust is mutual. When you talk to Americans, they believe they have right to mistrust Iran. When you talk to Iranians, they think the same. But the fact is, really, the mistrust is mutual. I have explained in my book in length all elements of mistrust, the history, the background, the Iranian position, the American position. But to be very frank, Iranians have more legitimate reasons to mistrust the US. From coup 1953 to supporting a quarter century of a dictator Shah in Iran, to supporting aggression of Saddam, 8 years war, to providing material and technology for the use of weapons of mass destruction against Iranians. They are really big issues. However, we need to understand the mistrust is mutual.
You know, Obama has, a year and a half left, and he faces a lot of domestic pressure. He faces a Congress that is not necessarily in favor of the deal. A lot of them are against it. What type of challenge does this present for Iran? Like, why would they make a deal with a president who faces all these problems and may be replaced in just a year and a half?
We need to pay attention to one big, extremely important fact. During last 35 years, the US has done whatever they could. Political war, cyber war, intelligence war, military war, economic war, everything possible they have done. There is nothing left they could do, and they have escaped. My point is this is really an illusion with the US Congress, which they believe coercion strategy would bring Iran to change its behavior, or would weaken Iran, or would isolate Iran, or would bring regime change in Iran. I am saying you Americans have implemented the maximum level of hostility, unilateral, multilateral, international, regionally, internationally, against Iran, which you have never done against any other country in the contemporary history, like Iran.
Okay.
However, after 35 years, today they are more scared than ever from stable Iran, powerful Iran, with huge influence in the region. They do not deny that Iran, if Iran is not the most stable country, is one of the most stable, powerful countries in the region. Therefore, the US coercion strategy, if has not been counterproductive, has failed.
But what about, some congressmen would say that it's sanctions, the tough sanctions, the Sasada basically, that have brought Iran to the negotiating table now. Do you dispute that premise?
This is really another illusion. Because if you compare the Iranian nuclear capacity and program before sanctions and after sanctions, you would see right after 2006, which the US and international powers imposed the first UN sanction and then expanded the sanctions to unilateral, multilateral sanctions, exactly Iranian nuclear program dramatically has been increased. Before sanctions, Iran had less than about 3,000 centrifuges. After sanctions, 22,000 centrifuges. Before sanctions, a few hundred kilograms of stockpile. After sanctions, about 10,000 kilograms of stockpiles.
So this is proof enough for you to say that it's not sanctions that brought them to the table now?
Definitely. And more proof, if you compare Joint Plan of Action 2013, you would see the principles are exactly the same principles we proposed in 2005, March 2005, when Khatami was president, when we had no UN sanctions. They are the same, exactly the same proposal, principles. We proposed 2005, America accepted in 2013 after all these sanctions, the same principles. The only reason made the deal possible was change in US position. They should be brave enough to accept huge mistake they made. In 2005, we failed as nuclear negotiation team because the US position was zero enrichment, no single centrifuge in Iran. In 2013, the US accepted Iran can have enrichment for its domestic needs.
So let me ask you a question, because in your USA Today article that you just wrote, you say that a lot of progress has been made, but that it's Iran's flexibility that should be credited for that progress. Aren't you saying that the US position has also shown some flexibility then?
No, I don't say the US position has not been changed. I said the Joint Plan of Action only was possible because a change in US position. Now it is a temporary agreement. Now we are coming to reach a comprehensive, permanent agreement. What I said in my today's op-ed at USA Today is that since 2013 to date, Iran has made clear to the P5+1 negotiators that within NPT, we have no problem to accept everything at the maximum. Even beyond NPT, we are ready for a period, not forever.
Confidence building measures.
For a period of confidence building, we are ready to accept some measures beyond NPT, like cap at 5%, enrichment at 5%, like limited stockpile, like no reprocessing.
Ambassador Mousavian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.
I'm Kayvon Afshari, Director of Communications for the American-Iranian Council, and this has been Iran Chat. For more, visit american-iranian.org.